member for Windsor West.
Mr. Chair, I noticed my friend didn't answer the two questions, and I would ask for unanimous consent for the House to give him an extra minute to answer the two questions I put forth to him.
Hear, hear. I'm sensing that there is no unanimous consent for that. Perhaps the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary will have an opportunity to properly reflect on those things at a later point in time. Opportunity to properly reflect on those things at a later point in time in debate. We'll now go to resuming debate by video conference. The Honourable Member for Brampton East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is my voice coming through? Perfect, thank you. Well, first and foremost, I'd like to thank you and the whole House of Commons team for working hard to ensure members of Parliament across the country can participate during this pandemic, as I'm doing right now, right here in Brampton. I'd also like to give a shout out to all the amazing teachers, including my wife, on World Teachers Day. Mr. Speaker, these past few months have been difficult for everyone, and I'm incredibly proud of Canadians for stepping up to the plate to take care of their loved ones, support their neighbors, and pivot their business practices. Despite many success stories, this has been a period marked by loss and pain for many, and I would like to extend my heartfelt condolences to the many families in my riding of Brampton East, as well as across the country, who have been profoundly impacted by COVID-19. Throughout these difficult months, I am pleased that our government took the bold steps needed to ensure Canadians could continue to be able to provide for their families, and businesses were given the tools and resources for their critical employee and supplier relationships and pivot to providing essential services or safer versions of their services. In my riding of Brampton East, Embassy Ingredients, a local food manufacturer, was able to access much-needed federal resources, donated N95 masks to healthcare workers, and began producing hand sanitizer. They are a terrific example of a socially minded company whose public safety focus has helped our community and allowed them to continue adding vibrancy to the neighborhood while continuing to employ Canadians. Our government acted quickly to help businesses weather the pandemic. Over 3.5 million jobs across Canada were supported by the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. We also established the Canada Emergency Business Account, which provides interest-free loans. As our economy transitions into the recovery process, many businesses still require help. For this reason, we are extending the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy through to next summer, so workers can remain on the payroll. Additionally, I look forward to the launching of a campaign with the goal of creating more than 1 million jobs, creating direct investments in the social sector and infrastructure, providing immediate training to quickly skill up workers, and providing incentives for employers to hire and retain workers are all part of our economic recovery plan moving forward. This fall, we will take further steps to bridge vulnerable businesses to the other side of the pandemic by expanding the Canada Emergency Business Account to help businesses with fixed costs while improving the Business Credit Availability Program. The speech from the throne highlighted how women, particularly those who are low income, have been hit hardest by COVID-19. Accelerating the Women's Entrepreneurship Strategy, which has already helped women across Canada grow their businesses, as well as giving parents access to affordable, inclusive, and high-quality childcare are important to our action plan for the women in our economy. As we go about fixing the holes in our system that were identified through this pandemic, addressing climate change to transform how we power our economy and communities will be a top priority of our government. Looking towards legislating Canada's goal of net zero emissions by 2050, I am proud of our government's efforts in the last 5 years and during the pandemic to keep combating climate change at the forefront of our efforts. Our government has set ambitious federal targets for zero-emission vehicles reaching 10% of light-duty vehicle sales per year by 2025, 30% by 2030, and 100% by 2040. In order to do this, the government has committed $130 million over 5 years into 2024 to deploy a network of zero-emission vehicle charging and refueling stations in more localized areas where Canadians live, work, and play. Here in the Peel region alone, 43 new electric vehicle Level 2 chargers were announced recently, with 12 in the city of Brampton, located conveniently at community and rec centers. Our government is also there to support industry to bring more electric vehicle production to Canada. In July, our infrastructure minister, my fellow Brampton MPs, and I were proud to announce a $45 million investment from our federal government in Brampton Transit. This is the largest investment in Brampton Transit in over 10 years. These funds will go towards creating a transit hub, the refurbishment of buses, and purchasing safety equipment. In an exciting step towards electrifying the transit system, 300 hybrid and conventional buses will be refurbished, making them more reliable for riders. Incentivizing the auto industry to transition into electric vehicle production, as well as dismantling convenience and accessibility barriers with a wide network of charging stations and a robust electrified public transit system, are tangible ways our government is working towards achieving our ambitious climate goals. This year, we are facing the most serious public health crisis Canada has ever seen. Our country has been presented with unprecedented challenges, with the safety of Canadians and protecting our economy being amongst the most pressing. Our government is working with Next Generation Manufacturing Canada, a not-for-profit organization who promote collaboration between technology and manufacturing to identify critical healthcare priorities and supply shortages. Our government allocated $50 million in funding to launch production of innovative manufacturing solutions that will contribute to the fight against COVID-19 by assisting federal procurement for ventilators, test kits, and PPE. In a move to further engage the manufacturing industry, our Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry has been working hard with industry across Canada to retool and ramp up PPE production. I am excited to say, with the diligent work of the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry and Minister of Public Service and Procurement, that Canada is now buying roughly half its personal protective equipment from Canadian companies producing PPE right here in Canada. Every day throughout the early days of the pandemic, my office received many calls and emails with feedback and suggestions regarding our government's economic response to COVID-19.
Isn't there the
Served as an important reminder of the real faces and families being impacted. I am incredibly proud of our government's flexible and adaptive response, allowing for more than 9 million Canadians to access the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit. COVID-19 has been particularly hard on seniors, as they're amongst the most vulnerable to its effect. In order to help seniors, we invested into a one-time GIS and OAS additional payments, partnered with the United Way, food banks, and charities to get essential services and supplies to seniors, as well as invested an additional $20 million into New Horizons for Seniors program. This additional investment went to community projects focusing on reducing isolation, improving quality of life, and helping seniors maintain a social support network. The Brampton-Bramley Christian Fellowship in my riding of Brampton East received additional investment in order for them to expand upon their virtual programming. This allowed them to administer enhanced digital literacy, training focused on apps in order to allow seniors to connect with others remotely, take part in online seniors fitness classes, and mental health wellness workshops. I'd like to offer my congratulations to all these organizations who identified a greater need than ever amongst our seniors and created innovative solutions to go about addressing that. I am thrilled our government was able to support these efforts. The government of Canada is providing Canadians with extra tools such as a COVID-19 alert app to help keep them safe and alert them if they have been in contact with someone who has tested positive for COVID-19. The COVID-19 alert app was developed as a secure way to make Canadians aware of their surroundings while improving contact tracing for health officials. As we have all experienced an increase in the use of digital software, the COVID-19 alert app is a great example of how the government continues to provide Canadians with accessibility, technology, and information to keep them safe. Ensuring youth are not only supported but have the tools and skills trained to improve their job opportunities and prospects continues to be of utmost importance to our government. The Canada Summer Jobs Program has provided funding to organizations who provide high-quality summer jobs to young people. This summer, employers were undoubtedly throwing a curveball with COVID-19. Congratulations to the organizations in my riding across Canada who were able to rise to the occasion and create virtual summer camps and other social distancing-friendly activities. You created unique and memorable experiences for your clients and customers and provided substantial job experiences for youth. Small businesses and organizations are the heart and soul of our neighborhoods and communities, and they provide skill developments and training for workers of all ages across our country. In order to recover from this pandemic as a more resilient nation, we must invest in a stronger workforce. Our government is prepared to make the biggest investment in Canadian history for workers by supporting skills development in growing sectors, helping workers receive education and training, and connecting them to employers and good jobs in order to grow and strengthen the middle class. In Brampton, as well as across the country, historic investments into comprehensive affordable housing plan has been occurring. In August, the single largest investment funding announcement in the region of Peel of $276 million was established to the National Housing Co-Investment from the Ministry of Families, Children and Social Development. This investment will allow for vulnerable populations to access affordable and safe housing, including victims of abuse, seniors, and people with mental and physical disabilities. I would also like to praise the Prime Minister for keeping Canadians informed and establishing a point of communication so that the support that Canadians and business owners needed was delivered efficiently. When hardworking Canadians suddenly were out of work or had their hours cut beyond a livable wage, our government stepped in with CERB. When businesses could not afford the cost of running their business or support their employees, our government stepped in with the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy and the Canada Emergency Business Account. When there was a fear of lack of PPE equipment in the country, the government stepped in to build domestic manufacturing capacity and secure supply chains. When the province and territories were working on reopening schools, our government stepped in with a $2 billion investment through the Safe Return to Class Fund. As public health measures were implemented to allow business and public centers to reopen, the federal government stepped in with a $19 billion investment through the Safe Restart program. All of this and more was done while making investments in green technology so that Canada can reach its target of net zero emissions by 2050 and create a better future for today and generations to come. Mr. Speaker, as we head into the fall and winter, I am energized by our government's ambitious speech from the throne to do everything we can to protect and support Canadians. Protecting Canadians, growing our economy, tackling climate change, protecting jobs, and investing in job creation in emerging industries continue to be our government's top priorities. I remain proud to have been chosen to represent my riding of Brampton East, and I'm incredibly humbled by the efforts of small businesses, not-for-profit organizations, and everyday people looking out for their neighbors while creating new opportunities to move our community forward. We have quite a lot of work ahead of us, but our government is committed to building a stronger and more resilient Canada together. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Edmonton Manning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the member from Brampton East listed many projects that the government shown the government's efforts in his home riding in Ontario. I don't see the same thing in my home riding of Edmonton Manning, and I do have an agri industry, canola farmers, growing industry in my riding, and China's coercive policy against our canola is being hurting a lot, all farmers, not only in my riding but across the country. What is the government doing to make sure that we would that facilitate the efforts for the canola farmers in Canada and in my riding? Thank you.
Honourable Member for Brampton East.
Well, I'd like to thank the honourable member for his question. As we all know, the pandemic devastated many sectors of the economy and many Canadians lost their jobs. Since the restart of the economy, many Canadians have been able to return to work, but many workers continue to struggle. We know through the CERB and the CRB or the revamped EI is a support system for these workers to help them in their time of need. Of course, our federal development agency works with different industries across Canada to support the agriculture sector, to support small businesses across the country. And as I said before, there's much more to be done, and I know that the government will continue listening to industries across the country to provide the supports that are needed.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Trois-Rivières. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech. During the pandemic, women have been affected. This has been underscored in his comments. But isn't there somewhat of a paradox in what the government is proposing, as women are encouraged to do entrepreneurship, but at the same time, they have to stay at home to take care of their young children who are affected by COVID? What solutions is he proposing? The honourable member for Brampton East.
Thank you to the member across the ways. I'm still working on my French, but I hope to answer in French one day. Listening has been a key part of our government's plan in providing a better future for Canadians. Listening to mothers who are working from home, but also who must care for their children. Listening to businesses that need funding in order to pay for their overhead cost. I know the government is continuing to listen to women that have been, disproportionately affected by this pandemic. And I know our government is working with a child care strategy to ensure we support families. I've got 2 children of my own, and I hear it from my neighbors as well that child care is extremely important on the minds of many, including women, in order to help them get back into the workforce and help contribute to the economy. We know that women have an important part to play in our economy, and we do need them involved. And I know our government will be working extremely hard to develop a national child care strategy.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Hamilton Centre.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I heard the honourable member from Brampton East reference tackling climate change. And I know that's a very important topic for my constituents. In fact, he referenced the production of electric cars, electric vehicles, as being one of the ways in which this Liberal government plans to do so. But at $60,000 to $70,000 a pop, plus auto insurance, my question through you to him is, does he not agree that providing more significant investments in the operating dollars of public transit would be a real and meaningful step towards climate change and not just a continued subsidy of private vehicles?
The honourable member for Brampton East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the honourable member from Hamilton for his important question. I'd like to point out that our government does believe in transit investments. Just here in Brampton, over a $45 million investment into transit. So we know if we can provide consumers and our residents with better transit options, more cleaner transit options, it will help reduce vehicles on the road and in turn reduce pollution. In terms of the electric vehicles, I think it's important that we give Canadians access to electric vehicles through incentives, so we can ensure that we get to net zero, by our certain targets.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for. Resuming debate, the honourable member for Thornhill.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we all know well just how much this Liberal government loves slogans and cliches and idioms, a whole variety of figures of speech and double talk to avoid straight talk, transparent answers, and well-reasoned policy. And as we all know, the Prime Minister is the cliche master, double talker, and sloganeer. I've got your back. We're all in this together. We will succeed because we must succeed. We have the tools. We're all hands on deck. And of course, the ultimate fallback when faced with a tough question, nothing is off the table. The Prime Minister has excused ethical lapses by telling the Ethics Commissioner he doesn't have business meetings when he improperly joins meetings with lobbyists. They're just relationship sessions. The PM excuses alleged misbehavior decades ago and much more recent by saying he respects women's ability to experience things differently. Now, Mr. Speaker, cliches are essentially a result of unremarkable thinking, which brings me to the theme of the speech from the throne and the remarkably imprecise commitment to build back better. This Liberal government may have an historic record for spending hard-earned Canadian taxpayer dollars, but they have an abysmal record of building anything. Last week, the government made much of the relaunch of perhaps the Liberals' most misguided creation, the Canada Infrastructure Bank. The institution, when it was created in 2017, was challenged far and wide as a problematic theoretical mix of public and private investment and interests, and, as predicted, it has been a flop. Still, the original CEO was retired with a six-figure bonus on top of his $600,000 a year salary. Last week's attempted resuscitation, a new board chair, and reprofiling of $10 billion of the original still languishing dollars. But the Liberals are still just hoping, Mr. Speaker, that private investors will be drawn in by the public money put up to backstop loans, which really lays all of the investment risks on Canadian taxpayers. Now, there is one infrastructure investment by this government that has seen Canadian tax dollars spent, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, it's been invested offshore, $256 million to buy an interest in the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Global affairs officials warned the Liberals that the investment would be used by China to further the communist regime's authoritarian model of governance in vulnerable nations around the world. And guess what? It has. Those Canadian tax dollars are building infrastructure, but the building isn't happening in Canada, and it's not creating Canadian jobs. All of that said, Mr. Speaker, there is one massive infrastructure project underway in Canada today, an almost $6 billion project, but it speaks powerfully again to this government's fumbling and to lost opportunities for a major Canadian employer and of many lost worker years of employment. It's the Gordie Howe International Bridge Project, one of the largest infrastructure projects in North America today. It will provide a spectacular new crossing link between Windsor and Detroit that will be of tremendous benefit to bilateral trade and travel. When bids were called in 2016 and 2017 for the massive precast reinforced concrete girders and slabs for the longest main span of any cable-stayed bridge in North America, Canada's leading infrastructure product manufacturing company with the largest manufacturing facility in Canada, a company called DCast, tendered bids compliant with Canadian specifications and Ontario's tough MTO standards. The girder portion of the project is worth $20 million and 30 direct full-time jobs for 1 year. The slab portion of the project is worth $40 million with 45 direct manufacturing jobs for 1.5 years. And that doesn't account for the many millions of dollars in downstream business for Ontario suppliers of the aggregates, the cement and steel materials, and the many trucking and transportation jobs. So what happened, Mr. Speaker? Well, DCast lost the bid. Who got it, Mr. Speaker? A company which didn't meet any of the quoted specifications or standards, with a facility not certified under the Canadian Precast Concrete Quality Assurance Certification Program, a company that doesn't buy material from the MTO's designated sources of materials list, a company that doesn't have facilities to allow proper concrete curing to MTO standards, a company, Mr. Speaker, that is an American company in Columbus, Ohio. When DCast asked why Canadian and Ontario MTO standards cited in the tender were so flagrantly ignored, the Ontario government, which should have jurisdiction over standards for a project largely in this province, had an answer. The answer was this federal government put those Canadian and Ontario safety and quality standards aside and decided to export Canadian dollars and Canadian jobs to Ohio. Wow. Mr. Speaker, Canada is paying for 85% of the Gordie Howe Bridge's construction, not to mention paying to build the customs facility on the U.S. side. And they exported the structural manufacturing and all those jobs. So the latest infrastructure minister has some questions to answer. Just why? And to what standards is the U.S. manufacturer working to? Who is auditing the U.S. manufacturer? MTO standards are set for 100 years service life. With deficient standards, does the Gordie Howe Bridge Consortium only care about the 30 years they will be responsible for operation of the bridge? Mr. Speaker, infrastructure spending should contribute to the growth and prosperity of Canada. The government just doesn't get that sourcing foreign in the absence of fair trade will hobble Canada's economic recovery and essential growth. In the real world, Mr. Speaker, building back better means moving that sorry lot to this side of the House. Hear, hear. And for Conservatives to deliver the jobs and the road, bridge, rail line, and subway infrastructure that Canada so sorely needs today. And as you know, Mr. Speaker, my constituents expect the subway element to include the long-delayed young subway extension north through Thornhill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a bit much, you know, when I sat in opposition benches and we had Stephen Harper as the Prime Minister, there was a lacking of support for Canada's infrastructure. Shortly after the 2015 election, we saw historic amounts of money being invested in Canada's infrastructure, as our Prime Minister believed by investing in infrastructure, we're building a healthier and stronger Canada. The member cites one particular project when there's literally thousands of projects all across our country, Mr. Speaker. And given that the member was a cabinet minister under Stephen Harper, I wonder, and this will be my question, does he have any regrets that the former Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, did not have the strong convictions towards investing in infrastructure as the member seems to currently have today, where he supports the current government's infrastructure plans?
For Thornhill.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I must say I'm always gently amused by my colleague from Winnipeg's revisionist history. And I would, with respect, correct him. This government, after its election in 2015, didn't build all those wonderful projects that he's talking about. They made promises to build the projects, but couldn't get the money out the door.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Montcalm. Mr. Speaker, the colleague from Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord, his colleague, said the other day that the Conservatives were for a predictable, constant increase in indexing for health care transfers. But it was a Harper government that cut those by 3%. Which is illogical and which contributed to what happened with the Liberal governments when they succeeded the Harper government in creating the shortfall. And the experts that came to speak to us at committee, the Standing Committee on Health, when they appeared to talk about COVID, they said it weakened the system and did not allow us to quickly respond to this kind of crisis. So I'd like to know what the Conservative position is. Are they in agreement with the claim to catch up the $28 billion and increase health care transfers to 35%? Yes or no? The Honourable Member for Thornhill. I wish to thank my colleague for that question.
I must correct him when it comes to the spectacular cutting of health transfers to the provinces. It was the Liberal government and Minister Paul Martin who downloaded and caused problems right across this country, for which we're still recovering from today. With regards to the Harper government, in which I was pleased to serve, we did not cut the health transfers. We reduced by 3% the future transfers because the provinces weren't spending those money. Now, with regards to the provinces' request for a greater share of health transfers, there are serious discussions to be taken, but this Liberal government didn't even mention them in the speech from the throne.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Windsor West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the member for Thornhill for raising the Gordie Howe Bridge. My first public meeting to have a new border crossing in Windsor was in 1998 at Marlborough Public School, and we're anticipating the final infrastructure to be built. I do want to note a couple things that are important, though, Mr. Speaker. The first girder and building process took place on the Parkway before. It was called Girder Gate, where I actually met and understood and revealed through a number of different welders a problem that took place where they actually unearthed over 200 girders on that. And the problem, though, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like the member to comment on this, is that the legislation calls for the P3, which is different than what was built for Sarnia. They had separate legislation for it. It's different for Niagara Falls. All those different things which led to having a P3 as part of the operator. So what's the solution going forth? Because that was the legislation enshrined by the Conservative government to do a P3 and to go against the traditional process for building international border crossings. Separate legislation for it. It's different for Niagara Falls. All those different things which led to having a P3 as part of the operator. So what's the solution going forth? Because that was the legislation enshrined by the Conservative government to do a P3 and to go against the traditional process for building international border crossings, which had been done in our country. But I do want to finish this by giving some credit. The Conservative Party, unlike the Liberals, did not fall under the siren spell of Matty Maroon, the private American billionaire who owns the Ambassador Bridge. So they have played a constructive role in this process and needs to be recognized for that, because it's been a long fight, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Thornhill.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'll always accept a compliment from my honourable colleague. And I must say, you can't link P3 projects with the scandal that occurred with regards to those girders that were rejected. What we need to see in projects like this, however they are structured financially, is to abide by the standards and the safety specifications that are set by Canadian, and in this case, the Government of Ontario's MTO standards. It's quite obvious that that this government, in awarding the contract or overruling the respect and recognition of the Canadian company's more than capable tender bid, has to be recognized and remedied.
Resuming debate.
supplies and securing testing, it is Canadians who pay the price. And we run the risk again that Canada's seniors will pay the greatest price. We have to do better for our seniors and for all Canadians. That is why, as Conservatives, we are focused on holding the Prime Minister and his government to account. We will fight for all Canadians, including those this Liberal government has left behind. We will fight for the interests of Saskatchewan and Western Canada, and we will focus on putting forward a real plan to keep Canadians safe, to protect jobs, and to get back on track, because our country's unity and strength depend on it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, a point and then a question. You know, this government has been very proactive on the seniors file. In fact, literally hundreds of millions of dollars, whether it's directly through increases to the GIS, the OAS, or the support to the many hundreds of nonprofit organizations that are out there, to the GST rebate, to the military or the forces in terms of long-term care facilities. This government has been there in a very real and tangible way, no matter what the Conservatives might try to say. But my question to the member opposite is, she seems to be hung up, as many of her Conservative colleagues, in regards to the prorogation of the session. I'm wondering if she could provide her thoughts in terms of the province of Manitoba. The Premier, majority Conservative government, has also prorogued the Manitoba legislature. Was he wrong to do so?
Member for Battleford's Lloydminster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for the question. First off, I just want to say it was this Liberal government that threw PPE out, if not sent away. Talk to our long-term care workers, the caregivers. That's what they need to provide safe places and work for in our long-term care facilities. So before he starts lecturing me, I think he should look at what his own government is doing and the ethical scandals it's plagued with. Thank you.
Questions and comments virtually. The Honourable Member for Beauport-Limoilou. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My colleague made a speech that was very representative of the realities we've been seeing for over 6 months now. In the beginning of her speech, she talked about seniors and their treatment. My question is this. The government is literally creating two classes of seniors. Those over 75 get a bonus, while the vast majority of seniors, those aged 65 to 75, get nothing. What does she have to say about that? What are her comments?
Member for Battleford's Lloydminster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for the question. In regards to this government and what they've done for seniors, I'd like to know. Because even stakeholders are stating how, in the throne speech, details around all issues, including the promised increase to OAS and CPP survivor benefit, were frustratingly vague and repeated the message we've been receiving for months. This is from the Canadian Association for Retired Persons. I don't think, if there's political will, it would be done already. We need to see, and for example, this goes back to my previous answer, we need to see action, and throwing out PPE isn't a good action. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Cowichan, Malahat, Langford.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my honourable colleague for her speech. And I know it focused mainly on seniors, but at the beginning of her speech, she did make reference to the oil and gas industries, particularly in Western Canada. And I'd caution Conservatives when they're speaking about Western Canada, because looking at the floor right now, my riding is actually farther west than anyone I can see there. But that being said, Mr. Speaker, we have two major factors going on right now. We have the threat of climate change, and we know that there's an investment climate which is starting to peel away from oil and gas. So I would ask my honourable colleague, given those facts and the way the industry is heading, would it not be smarter and better policy to start making major investments in helping the workers, the men and women who work so hard in oil and gas, helping them transition to the industries that will be a part of Canada's future 10, 20, 30 years from now? Start making those investments now before they start costing us far more than they should.
Honourable Member for Battleford's Lloydminster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the colleague for the question. I would like to invite that member to come to my riding. And tell that to the parents that are trying to put food in the tummies of their children.
That's right.
Who are just trying to get ahead. That's all they're trying to do. For the farmers that have to supplement their ag income because of the crappy policies this government's put forward, like C-69, the carbon tax, C-48, whatever it is, that's making it more difficult to get their product to market.
That's right.
Taking more money out of their pocket, who have to subsidize their ag income to work in oil and gas. Because they cannot put food on their table with what they're receiving for their ag income as it is. So before there's suggestions of allowing investment to free this country, which all our energy investment is leaving, and leaving people without work, I would invite him to come and say that to my constituents in Battleford, Lloydminster.